It seems like everywhere you turn these days, AI is popping up, right? And not just for like fun stuff either. We're talking about AI getting involved in some pretty big decisions, things like who gets hired for a job or who gets approved for a loan.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really moving beyond like the realm of science fiction and becoming something we're dealing with every day.
Exactly. And that obviously brings up a whole bunch of new questions that we all need to be thinking about.
Definitely. And luckily, there's some really interesting research starting to come out that's helping us grapple with some of these questions, which is what we are diving into today.
That's right. So for today's deep dive, we are taking a look at a 2025 study from the European Union Joint Research Center.
That's right.
It's titled The Impact of Human AI Interaction on Discrimination, and it's really fascinating.
Yeah, it gets to the heart of a really, really crucial question, especially as AI becomes more prominent in all these important decisions. We keep hearing about the importance of human oversight when it comes to AI.
Right, like we can't just let the algorithms run wild. There has to be a human in the loop, right?
Exactly. But the question is, does that human actually make things fairer?
Right, like are they actually there to ensure that the process is more impartial for everyone involved?
Or are they, maybe unintentionally, just adding another layer of potential bias into the mix?
That's a really important distinction. So how did this study actually go about investigating this? It sounds like a pretty complex thing to research.
Yeah, it's a big question. And they actually did a really impressive large-scale case study to try to get at some answers.
Okay, so what did that involve?
Well, they involved something like 1,400 field professionals. So these are people who work in areas like lending and hiring.
So actual people who are making these kinds of decisions in the real world.
Yeah, exactly. And these professionals were presented with various realistic scenarios, and they used two different types of AI decision support systems, or DSS as they're called.
Okay, so basically AI tools designed to provide recommendations to help with these decisions.
Exactly.
Now, you said there were two types of these AI systems. What was the difference?
Right. So one of the AI models was specifically optimized for fairness.
Okay.
So its programming was designed to actively try and protect against any kind of discrimination based on things like gender or nationality.
So they built in safeguards to try to prevent certain types of outcomes?
Right. And then the other AI model was a more generic one that was just focused primarily on accuracy.
Okay, so the first one was specifically designed to be fair, and the second one was designed to be as accurate as possible.
Right, without those specific fairness constraints built in.
Gotcha. So basically, the researchers wanted to see how these two different approaches to AI would influence the human decision makers.
Exactly.
Okay, so what happened? What did they find?
Well, let's talk about the generic AI first.
Okay.
The one that was just focused on accuracy. Unfortunately, it did end up introducing some bias into the decision-making process.
So even though it was just trying to get the right answer based on the data, it still ended up being discriminatory in some cases.
Yeah, and this is really important because it shows how even seemingly neutral data can still lead to discriminatory outcomes.
Right, because the data itself might reflect existing societal biases.
Exactly. And in this case, the generic AI showed a tendency to be biased against both women and Italian applicants.
So the algorithm, just by trying to be accurate, ended up replicating or maybe even amplifying those existing societal biases?
That's right.
Okay, so that's the generic AI. What about the fair AI?
Well, on the surface, it seemed to be living up to its name. It did seem to actually be helping to reduce discrimination. At least initially, the data suggested that it was moving in the direction of greater impartiality, at least in its recommendations.
Okay, so that sounds promising, right? Problem solved. Just use the fair AI and everything will be fine.
Well, not so fast.
Uh-oh.
This is where it gets really interesting and maybe a little bit paradoxical.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What happened?
So even though they had this AI that was specifically designed for fairness, the human decision makers were no more likely to actually follow its recommendations compared to the recommendations from the generic AI.
Wait, so they had a fair AR, but the humans overseeing it didn't actually favor its suggestions any more than the suggestions from the AI that was designed for fairness?
Right.
That doesn't make a lot of sense.
It's kind of counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, you would think they would be more inclined to trust the fair AI.
You would think so. And here's another layer to the paradox. Even though that generic AI initially showed that bias pretty much disappeared when humans were involved in the decision-making process.
So the human oversight actually corrected for the AI's initial bias.
Yeah, in this specific case, it seems like it did.
Wow, so it's not as simple as just using a fair AI. The human element really complicates things.
It does, and it really raises questions about how our own judgment interacts with algorithms, regardless of how fair those algorithms are designed to be.
Right, so it's not just about the AI itself, it's about how humans use it.
Exactly.
So why do you think the humans weren't more likely to follow the recommendations of the fair AI? Like, were they just not trusting it? Or what do you think was going on there?
Well, the study suggests that organizational norms might have played a role.
Okay, so like the culture of the company or the institution.
Yeah, exactly. It seems like the human overseers, maybe unconsciously, were more likely to go along with AI recommendations that aligned with the way things were already done in their organization.
Oh, I see. So even if they had a fair AI, if the company already had a certain pattern of, say, hiring more men than women, the human overseer might be more likely to just go along with the AI if it also recommended hiring a man.
Right, because it just feels familiar. It fits with the existing norms.
That's really interesting and kind of worrying, too.
Yeah, it means that AI, instead of correcting those patterns, could actually end up perpetuating them.
Right. It's like if you have a company that's already biased in a certain way and then you introduce AI into the mix, it could just make things worse.
Exactly. So it's not enough to just focus on the AI itself. You also need to think about the broader organizational context.
Absolutely. Now, I know the study also looked at what happened when humans decided to override the AI's recommendations.
Oh yeah, the override decisions, those are really important.
Right. So what did they find there?
Well, they found that sometimes human overseers would go against what the AI recommended, even when the AI was recommending something fair.
And why would they do that?
Well, the study suggests that sometimes it was because of the human's own personal biases.
Oh, so even if you have a perfectly fair algorithm, the human can still inject their own bias into the final decision.
Exactly. And that obviously undermines the whole point of using a fair AI in the first place.
Yeah, it's like you need a way to keep the humans in check, too.
Right, we need mechanisms to review these overrides and to understand why they're happening.
So it's like you need a watchdog for the watchdog.
I like that. It's a good way to put it.
Well, with all of this complexity, is there any hope for humans and AI to work together to make decisions that are truly fair for everyone?
I think there is. The study did point to some ways that humans and AI can complement each other.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, the human overseers in this study often talked about how they valued their ability to assess certain qualities that AI might miss.
Like what kind of qualities?
Things like communication skills or someone's adaptability, that kind of thing. Those are really important in many jobs, but they're hard to quantify in the data that AI typically relies on.
Right, you can't really capture those things in a spreadsheet.
Exactly. So humans can bring that kind of nuanced judgment to the table, which is something that AI might struggle with.
Okay, I see. So it's not about humans versus AI. It's about finding ways for them to work together effectively.
Exactly. The ideal scenario is one where AI does a lot of the heavy lifting with the data analysis, but humans are there to provide that extra layer of contextual judgment.
That makes a lot of sense. But for that to work, the AI needs to be transparent, right?
Absolutely. Humans need to be able to understand why the AI is making certain recommendations, not just blindly approve or reject them.
Right, like the AI can't just be a black box.
Exactly.
Now, I know there's also this idea of people being either overly skeptical of algorithms or overly reliant on them.
Right, like some people just don't trust AI at all, while others trust it too much.
Yeah, exactly. Did the study address that at all?
They did. They talked about this thing called algorithm aversion, which is where people tend to override even good AI advice.
Oh, so they just have this gut feeling that the AI is wrong, even when it's not.
Right, and then there's the opposite problem called automation bias, where people rely on the AI too much, even when it might be flawed.
So it's like a Goldilocks situation. You need to find the right balance of trust and skepticism.
Exactly.
You mentioned earlier how the AI actually influenced the human decision makers. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so remember how we talked about the discriminatory AI, the one that was biased against women?
Yeah.
Well, what they found was that when male decision makers used that AI, they actually became more biased against women in their own decisions.
Oh, wow. So the biased AI didn't just make biased recommendations, it actually amplified the existing biases of the humans using it.
That's right. It's kind of a scary thought, right?
Yeah, it's like a vicious cycle. And did the same thing happen with the bias against Italians?
Yeah, they saw a similar pattern there. The AI that was biased against Italians ended up amplifying the biases of the Italian decision makers.
So the AI was basically confirming their existing prejudices?
In a way, yeah.
It's really disturbing to think about the real-world impact of that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And it highlights the importance of being aware of these potential feedback loops.
So throughout this whole experiment, did the humans have any sense of whether the AI they were using was fair or not?
It's interesting because there weren't really any significant differences in how the decision makers perceived the fairness or accuracy of the AI, regardless of which one they were using.
So they couldn't tell the good AI from the bad AI.
Basically, no.
That's pretty concerning. If people can't even tell if the AI they're using is fair or not, how can we expect them to use it responsibly?
That's a really good question, and it points to the need for more transparency in these systems.
For sure. Now, I know the study also gathered some qualitative data, like from interviews and workshops, right?
That's right.
What were some of the key takeaways from those?
Well, one thing that came up was the importance of the job interview.
Okay.
Humans tend to see the interview as a crucial part of the hiring process because it allows them to gather implicit information about the candidate.
Right, like you can get a sense of someone's personality or their communication style in an interview, which is hard to do just from looking at their resume.
Exactly. But of course, interviews can also be prone to bias.
For sure.
Another key takeaway was that fairness isn't a one-time thing, it's an ongoing process.
Like you can't just build a fair AI and then forget about it.
Right. You need to be constantly monitoring and evaluating the system to make sure it's still being fair.
That makes sense. And do experts have any thoughts on the idea of fairness through unawareness?
Yeah, so that's the idea that you can achieve fairness by just excluding certain attributes from the data.
Like you just don't tell the AI about someone's gender or race, and then it can't discriminate based on those things.
Right. But the experts in this study were pretty skeptical of that approach.
Why is that?
Well, they argued that even if you exclude those attributes, there are still other ways that bias can creep in.
Like those attributes might be correlated with other variables that you're not excluding.
Exactly. So it's not a foolproof solution.
Gotcha.
And finally, the experts really emphasized the need for institutional oversight in addition to individual human oversight.
So it's not enough to just have one person checking the AI's work.
Right. You need to have a system in place to ensure that the AI is being used fairly and responsibly across the entire organization.
That makes a lot of sense. So what's the big takeaway for our listeners from all of this?
I think the main takeaway is that human oversight of AI is really complex. It's not a simple fix for preventing discrimination.
Right. It's not as easy as just putting a human in the loop.
Exactly. Human oversight can be beneficial, but it's really influenced by a lot of different factors, like the human's own biases, the norms of their organization, and even the design of the AI system itself.
Right. And sometimes the human oversight can actually make things worse.
Unfortunately, that's true. So we need to be really thoughtful about how we design and implement these systems.
Absolutely. So given all of this, what's the next step? What should we be focusing on to ensure that AI is used fairly and responsibly, especially in these high-stakes decisions that affect people's lives?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It seems like we need to move beyond just relying on individual human oversight.
So we need to think about systemic changes, like at the organizational level.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. We need to create cultures and structures that promote fairness, both in how we use AI and in how we make decisions in general.
That's a really important point. So it's not just about the technology, it's about the people using it and the context in which it's being used.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a really fascinating and thought-provoking conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure. It's been great talking about this with you. It's clear that the relationship between humans and AI is only going to get more complex in the future.
Absolutely. And it's crucial that we keep having these conversations so that we can figure out how to navigate this new world in a way that benefits everyone.
I completely agree. And I think this study gives us a lot to think about as we move forward.
It definitely does. So to our listeners, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. What do you think are the biggest challenges and opportunities when it comes to human oversight of AI? And what steps do you think we need to take to ensure that AI is used fairly and ethically in the future?
Those are important questions that all of us need to grapple with. And I think this study really underscores the need for a holistic and nuanced approach to AI fairness. We can't just rely on technological solutions. We need to think about the human element, the organizational context, and the broader societal implications. It's a complex issue, but it's one that we need to address head-on if we want to create a future where AI is a force for good in the world.
So thanks again for listening to this deep dive, and we hope this has given you some food for thought. We'll see you next time.
See you then.